Welcome, everyone. My name is Jane Belster, and thank you so much for coming to today's launch of the IDC Growth Toolkit. I'm the Program Director for the Inclusive Digital Commerce Program. That's the host of today's session. The Inclusive Digital Commerce Program is a program operated by BFA Global with the support of Mastercard Foundation. And for the last 2 years, we've been working to improve the livelihoods and resilience of MSCs in Ghana. And the way we do this is we work with the Catalyst Accelerator model. You may have heard of the Catalyst 1 program. And we provide 4 areas of support. There's the bespoke venture acceleration to help startups close gaps and access resources and talent in order to help their organizations grow. We also provide connections, critical and strategic connections to the ecosystem through our circles of investors and corporate partners, ecosystem actors, as well as access to grant capital. We provide up to $120,000 in flexible capital. And finally, we generate evidence and demonstration of what's working in tech tech and fintech enabled approaches to reach low-income populations and have an impact. All of that comes together to help accelerate 6 digital commerce companies in Ghana. And by working with them in different parts of the digital commerce ecosystem and helping them grow, it's led to the impact of reaching almost 69,000 youth-led MSCs, helping them also grow their businesses through digital commerce. And from the work with the companies and the growth in the customer base, resulting in an expanding and growing digital commerce ecosystem in Ghana. We were looking, in doing this work, we were looking for 3 areas of impact. The first was the level of growth in the portfolio companies themselves, so seeing how much they're growing in terms of their customers, their revenues primarily, and by helping those companies grow, then enabling them to reach more MSCs who are being served with their products and services, and therefore looking for the growth at the level of the MSC, what kind of revenue growth that contributes to improved livelihoods, and thinking about livelihoods through not only income generation, but job creation, as well as improving the conditions in which they work. And then finally, because of the companies growing, the MSCs also growing, that increased demand, pulling in workers into the value chain along digital commerce. So what kind of workers and jobs are being created as a result of that expansion? Just a few minutes to share a new IDC video that we've produced as we wrap up the program, and that summarizes nicely what the program has been doing and the kind of growth that we think that the program has delivered and measured. So just allow me to flip over to the video. All right, please let me know if the audio is not coming through.
For the last 2 years, the Inclusive Digital Commerce Accelerator, IDC, has been working with 6 digital commerce companies in Ghana.
IDC has focused on growing the digital commerce ecosystem in Ghana in a way that truly benefits small businesses.
What's unique about the Catalyst Accelerator model is that we're able to provide bespoke support to the companies.
So the companies grew by over 8 times their revenues over the course of this program, and also in terms of the capital they access. So the companies went on to raise almost $10 million of funding following being part of this program.
When we started the program 2 years ago, we didn't know the level of impact that we could have through digital commerce.
The program was really designed to impact the small businesses, the MSCs. The way it did that was to enable growth on average of 39% across the MSCs that were part of this program. And also it led to 69,000 young people being in work, which is a critical metric of success for us as a foundation.
In one instance, one of our portfolio companies, Oze, was able to increase the number of waged workers in their company by 2.5 times.
The number of MSCs that were served by the digital commerce companies before the program was around 60,000, and it more than doubled to around 140,000 by the end of the program. So there was a significant impact in terms of the number of SMEs onboarded.
The IDC program was one of the first ways we were looking at how tech and digital commerce could positively impact livelihoods.
So the 2 key demographics that are of critical importance to the foundation that were impacted by this program were young people. So 69,000 youth-led businesses were supported in this program, as well as 53,000 women-led businesses.
We've seen young women MSEs be able to leverage digital commerce to explore and create new livelihoods that they didn't have before.
So based on the research that we conducted following the conclusion of the program, there were a couple of ways that women identified the way the businesses were supported.
A majority of them found it much easier to run their business because of the digital commerce services and products. But they were also able to grow their revenue and increase their resilience by saving. If we were to do this again, I'd double down on targeting young women. We learned that they are benefiting from digital commerce and they are harder to reach and harder to serve.
It's really important for us to understand the learnings from this program that dictate that women, and young women particularly, start off at a lower starting point and have greater challenges. So we need to be more intentional about how we address those challenges to make sure we create dignified and fulfilling work for young women through this program in the future.
Thank you. Okay. That'll wait for me. So to sum up our work at IDC, and through our direct work, we wanted to highlight for you what we've learned about companies in the growth stage and the opportunities to tailor the support so that they can leverage key growth levers. And that's what we'll cover in today's session. So before we jump in, I wanted to get a sense of who's in the room. If you could take 30 seconds to help us understand. And here's the poll for you. Okay, we have mostly founders and CEOs, which is who we're hoping to reach, but steadily keeping up with others and some accelerators and a researcher. Great, thank you. Okay, so as reflected in the registration, I'm just stopping it now to keep us going. It's about the distribution we were expecting, half founder CEOs and others. I'm not sure what organizations you're representing, but thank you for joining us and for taking that. And a second question for you to get a sense of where you're coming in from and the relevant for today's material of your experience with growth model. So run the second poll. There we go. Thank you. Okay, likewise, this is actually pretty well spread out across the responses, averages, and fixed monthly growth rate seem to dominate. Let me just share that. I'm going to stop. I'll share the results there. Okay, you can see that. Great. So that'll be helpful for Jorge and Matt as they are as we move into their sections to get a sense of what your approaches have been in the past and how this approach may be helpful for you moving forward. Great, thank you for that. Well, I'm pleased to introduce my longtime colleague and the IDC Portfolio Engagement Manager, Matt Grasser. Matt led the engagements with our 6 portfolio companies, so he was firsthand witnessing where the companies were in their trajectory and worked with them to address key gaps so that they could implement their growth strategies and we could support them as a program. Please welcome Matt.
Great, thanks so much, Jane, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our attendees joining from across the Catalyst Fund ecosystem and really around the world. Super excited to be with you all here today, presenting some insights that hopefully drive some conversation and and future growth in all of your organizations or organizations that you are working with. So I think it's important to start with what seems like a pretty simple question. What does it mean to be in a growth stage? So this is a crucial yet surprisingly not obvious question to answer. Within the Catalyst Fund, of course, we've had a depth of experience working with both early stage and growth stage startups through our venture building and venture acceleration facilities, respectively. And within these engagements, our specialists provide uniquely tailored and targeted support across several areas to help our startups reach the next stage of their journey, whether they're early stage, growth stage, or otherwise. So one might find it interesting to hear that even for us, the answer to this question has historically not been as exactly straightforward as our high-level answers that appear on this slide. So of course, we know that being in a growth stage does mean that there are some fundamental truths about a startup. It's got basic foundations in place like product market fit, a basically viable business model, customer base that's pretty solid, at least in one segment or one geography. But really, this descriptive approach to things doesn't get us to what this means for the startups, founders, and investors in terms of actionable implications. If we can move to the next slide. Yeah, I mean, through our work with Catalyst Fund's portfolio of over 60 global startups and the 6+ startups that we've worked with through the IDC program, we've gained a deep understanding of not only what characterizes or describes the venture building and acceleration stages, but also these nuanced organizational and product shifts that drive each stage of growth over a range of factors. So things like product, customers, operations, team, business model, financing, et cetera. So what you're looking at here is a stylized mapping, kind of where this toolkit started to so to speak, developed during one of our IDC cohorts of how measurement of such characteristics, or at least several such characteristics, were quantified and analyzed as data, and then led to the successful prioritization of opportunities for growth stage companies. So interventions such as segmentation of customer base and more effective marketing campaigns targeted to users that we knew from data that would drive revenues and drive engagement, drive impact. Superpowered financial modeling approaches, which I think Jorge will cover an example of this later in today's session, and augmenting the team with particular specialists. So these interventions driven by data from these different layers across a characterization informed the successes that Jane and Chirag highlighted in the first part of today's session: the growth in MSE impact, the growth in fundraising, the growth in usage and adoption of these products. So driven by this initial empirical framework from years with our startups, we sought to understand the manner in which we might convert this into a more strategic approach for use beyond our inaugural cohorts and more broadly across our Catalyst Fund ecosystem and broader ecosystem of impact-oriented startups, funders, researchers, and beyond. So certainly we found that when it comes to extending our understanding of startup growth beyond our direct kind of empirical experience, there's an abundance of bespoke literature that tackles maybe one or two single components of this idea of growth at a time. For example, there are purely descriptive frameworks that inform, the classification, the descriptive framework for these various stages of growth, like we were talking about earlier. There's other literature that presents lists of high-level factors for external business analysts and consultants to consider just from a purely financial point of view. And there's papers that talk about how to characterize each set of growth and break that down into a descriptive set of parameters. In terms of diagnostic tools, there's also like a handful of these, but they tend to be relatively one-dimensional. These allow companies to zero in on a very specific single aspect of their organization, like how do I build my culture in a very effective way? How mature is my technical infrastructure or my team? Am I ready for AI? Like there's an AI readiness framework that Catalyst Fund has put out in the past. However, with this abundance of literature and kind of very targeted diagnostics, we've really found that there are very few or even no tools that assess the business itself across these multiple dimensions and go beyond describing the startup at this particular slice in time to also combine these insights into more of a recipe or a roadmap for sustainable growth across all of these dimensions, a more 360 view of an organization with actionable insights for the stakeholders. So with all of this in mind, this is a bit of context, but with all of this in mind, through the first 2 cohorts of the IDC program, we aimed to formalize in more granular detail what exactly it means for startups to progress from one stage of growth to the next. So we understand from the Inclusive FinTech program, like really how startups can evolve from early stage to growth stage. Through IDC, we really deeply understood, came to understand and guide the growth from this growth stage into more of a scaled approach and a more mature phase of a company. So in order to do this, we developed the Growth Toolkit, which is a framework that allows for measurement of growth based on really 6 key growth levers. You see them on the screen here. So things like product, what are you putting out there? What are the goals of the team? Are you iterating on the product? Do you have lean kind of approaches in place? Of course, the customers, who are you approaching? Are you expanding segments? Are you measuring the success of various segments? How are you understanding value proposed and realized to these customers? Marketing and sales. So how are you targeting your marketing campaigns? How are you measuring the effectiveness of these and feeding that back in, importantly, into your decisions on product features, on which channels to kind of express and maybe forge partnerships through. Technical and operational considerations. So kind of the gears in your organization, how the mechanisms and processes inform business decisions. So we measure this in terms of like the data that's available to make these decisions, the interfaces that are surfacing insights from this data, and how this then gets operationalized through the team. And that's the next parameter here, which is the team. What is the composition? Is it a couple of founders and outsourced staff to build the product? Is it a multi-layer organization with kind of middle management in place and really kind of specialized people that are onboarded? Is it a massive team across several geographies? So this all kind of factors into the team layer. And finally, the business and financial layer. So this is really like the financial viability, investment roadmap, economics of the solution, and how kind of unit economics also cascade up into the overall health of the business. So through these 6 levers, which are explained more detail in the toolkit itself, really through these levers, this toolkit aims to serve not only to guide startups to diagnose where they are in their growth trajectory, but also to inform the founders as individuals in practical day-to-day decisions that they may need to make at different stages within the kind of 3 high-level stages. And finally, really to enable investors and other maybe external stakeholders that are key to the startup to recognize growth as a concrete set of parameters in financial models, in your data analytics tools, et cetera, not only as a measure of product or team, but really as a measure of the financial health of the business. So yeah, as mentioned, we've seen really firsthand through our scoping of Catalyst Fund's tailored specialized technical support mechanisms that even having a basic framework to assess and diagnose a growth startup, and by basic, I mean, something less formal than we're presenting here today, just even having those layers defined and having that guide our approach to some extent, really allows each of the stakeholders involved to consider the growth of a startup business more granularly, to understand where a targeted intervention may be most effective and really act on these insights. So a formalized version of this, we've really found as this has become less and less ad hoc and kind of in early stage and more of a formalized approach, we've really seen this become effective not only for startups, but for guiding many of our engagements with corporates in our work more broadly. So the IDC Startup Growth Scorecard that's previewed here on the screen allows for this overall assessment in a quantitative manner. The scoring is achieved by scoring and evaluating each of these factors that we mentioned earlier, these 7 layers across the business, rating it kind of like on a 1 to 5 scale to understand exactly and precisely which state a startup is in overall by summing up these factors. And again, which forms of intervention can be prioritized to maximize things like return on investment of a given intervention or product feature launch or new product launch, maximize things like impact as well, and any other secondary KPIs that the startup may have set as well. So that's, I think, already pretty cool by itself, that like we can get this overall like high level assessment of, you know, okay, I'm called a growth stage startup, but certain factors are lagging, certain factors are leading. And that's exactly what really the intention is here. So beyond the overall assessment, like, okay, I can call myself a growth stage company, but an examination of the individual rows, particularly those that are lowest scoring, can help to identify blockers to growth, develop a strategy to remove these barriers, and create milestones to execute on this strategy. So examples of milestones that may surface through this scorecard exercise may include indirect actions, so things that have a downstream effect, but not necessarily like an immediate effect. So things like preparing and launching a data warehouse to consolidate data with a business analytics tool like Redash to surface customer lifecycle insights. Like that's not something that's directly today impacting usage by customers or paying users or activity on your platform, but is informing your team downstream on how to more effectively intervene and do these items. Other indirect actions might include implementing agile approaches within the engineering team's processes, things like hiring a scrum master to manage that process, or even like streamlining iterative lean product approaches for development by formalizing your design processes, hiring a head of product, these sorts of things. So you can see a trend through these indirect actions that they're like investments in a next step. So these certainly are captured by the outputs of the scorecard and a conversation around these scores. But milestones may also comprise direct actions with more immediate effects, like investing directly in a new feature based on primary user research to advance toward product market fit in new segments or new markets. So things like acquiring customers through a partner that might serve a market segment, which is proven particularly active on your own platform. This is another direct interaction or direct action. A third example is doubling down on an acquisition channel that's proven by the Pirate metrics data to maximize retention downstream of users and revenue production of users. So these milestones are direct actions, which can also be surfaced through the scorecard exercise and the toolkit. So by bringing these insights through the growth toolkit, characterizing these key startup factors, these can then serve as indicators or reference points through which to then model the real and potential financial trajectory of a startup. For example, via business model profiling and tools like S-curve growth projection mechanisms for startups, which Jorge will describe next.
Thank you, Matt. And just to introduce Jorge, our colleague, he's a seasoned expert in portfolio analysis and business case development. He's also the lead financial modeler at BFA Global. Please welcome Jorge to share his insights about how to interpret and employ S-curves to model meaningful and holistic growth. Jorge?
Thanks, Jane. It's great to be here and to see quite a number of familiar and also new names on the list. So excited to be sharing some of the work that we have recently done, and hopefully further conversations with some of you. So before actually diving into our approach to modeling growth, I wanted to briefly present to you an analysis that we produced and of which findings you will find in the toolkit. So throughout this document, we analyzed 4 different prototypes of companies at various growth stages. And these prototypes are represented by the 4 different models that you actually see before you. Each model would represent like a distinct growth stage that a company may not may or may not go through as it evolves over time. And I think that by studying these models and the growth stages they represent, we sort of gained insights into their journeys on building and growing this type of companies. And if you are here, like in this webinar, it is very likely that you are part of a company that fits at least one of these archetypes. And if this is the case, I think the following slides may resonate with you. So when companies are in the middle of the growth stage, they have like a lot of data especially from the recent past that they can use, and actually they normally use to make decisions. So this makes it very easy to look back and then create studies about what happened. And we try to do that. We try to do this for these 4 prototypes, like by creating a historical narrative. And eventually we ended up seeing, when we looked at their data, that every company started slowly, then accelerated, and eventually leveled off. So, we can safely say that during the growth stage, the whole growth stage, companies typically experience, that cyclical pattern of growth that can be represented by a sequence of S-curves. Now, synthesizing our financial modeling work, that we've done with not only with companies in the IDC portfolio, but with other companies working in other projects with BFA. And based on what we have seen, we can say that all companies have at least some kind of financial model, right? Like starting from the simple Excel sheet to maybe more complex and robust type of models. And what we could also see is that there's always this challenge looming, like the challenge of creating a compelling story that sort of combines the company's business history with the future plans, the plans to reach in those milestones that Matt was referring to. And when it comes to projecting growth, many companies tend to use conventional techniques such as averaging the recent growth rates or using moving averages to try to smooth out short-term fluctuations. So that is in line with the results of the poll that we launched. But actually, these 2 techniques have this assumption that past growth accurately predicts future, and you can see this these 2 techniques in the orange and red lines in the exhibit. So that assumption of being that past growth accurately predict future is not always the case, as you may know already. And in fact, if you go to the opposite side of the equation, and this is also consistent with the results of the poll, the most common approach we have seen, is to use really hard-coded monthly growth rate, which is very simple to use. That is why I assume it's the more broadly used. But if you think this through, it's not very realistic, to expect growth to be perpetually exponential. Even in real life, that almost never happens. So, and that is actually represented by the blue line in the exhibit. So as you can see, this can lead, especially the blue line can lead to overly optimistic projections that really don't reflect the true potential of the company. So in essence, what we want to introduce with these S-curves, using the S-curves for projecting growth, in essence, is so imagine that you're looking at like a map to help you navigate, and you know where you are, and at a certain moment, like you know where you are right now, and you have an idea of where you wanna go. But how do you get there? So that's where the S-curves like come in. And really S-curves are a household concept, right? So and for many good reasons. So they are very straightforward. They provide a simple, visual, and clear way to understand a company's growth stage, you know, within its growth cycle. And you know, they beautifully tell the story of starting off slowly, then gaining some momentum as the company accelerates, and eventually, you know, leveling off as the company reaches, you know, the maximum potential, right? And I also think they are a very powerful tool that is able to combine like your key metrics, like customer acquisition, for instance, with a very intuitive approach to make projections. And therefore you can like visualize the whole story of where you have been and where you're headed. And you do that by combining subsequent S-curves to then create like a cohesive narrative. So you might make it easier to even to communicate your message to, you know, your company's growth trajectory to others. So that's sort of the approach that we suggest, like combining what you already know about your company with an S-curve approach to create like a powerful visual story of your growth journey. So moving on to really how to modeling the S-curve, and this slide and the next one are just snapshots. We developed this financial model using Causal. Causal is a very intuitive, a very user-friendly modeling tool. Although we have version of this model like in other tools like Google Sheets. And I know, like, you know, we have like little time during this webinar, but I just wanted to make sure to mention that we have prepared a video that explains how the model works, like in greater detail. We have like the step-by-step on how to interact with the model. We will share this video along with you know, the access link to the model and also, you know, a simple survey. So back to taking a quick look within the model. So this is to project the first S-curve. So when you enter, you will see the input section at the top line. And here you can establish values, fixed values or ranges of values. So say that you want a growth rate to be not 3%, but, you know, to go from 2%, to 5%. You also want to work with start and end dates for each business milestone. You know, those milestones that Matt was referring to, or S-curves. In the model, you will find like for every S-curve, you will find a set of inputs. So an S-curve is intuitively connected to each milestones. You can also fine-tune like the speed of growth for each phase of the S-curve just by adjusting the percentage of exponential growth and the number of data points that you want to use to calculate the transition phase. Now, to project the second and really the subsequent S-curves, you will just need to, again, set the start dates for the exponential growth phase and the transition phase for each of the subsequent S-curves. And you will also need to set the growth rate for the exponential growth phase, and then fix the number of data points from the previous phase to properly calculate the shape of the curve in that transition phase. So again, the detailed explanation on how to interact with the tool is in the video that we're going to provide. I wanted to also share some final thoughts on sort of the usefulness and relevance of this approach. So let me share some final thoughts. So first, like the growth of companies in general, and especially in terms of customers, and along with the sales funnel, are fundamental pillars for like achieving a realistic financial modeling buildup. And those are like the two components that can be translated into templates, because the underlying process of customer acquisition or conversion is very standard across all companies, right? So that is why we wanted to start with this first financial model that sums in this specific module or financial model. So this provide the resulting drivers from what you project as customers on the sales funnel really provides the key unit economics for then scaling revenue, cost, and many of the expenses. So for example, for say delivery companies, the key drivers such number of customers, number of orders, GMV, gross merchandise values, and so on, like vehicles or whatever, really comes from an accurate projection of how customers are coming in. So that is why like everything is connected with an accurate and straightforward means to making your growth projections. So this eventually allows to answer questions as like, how can we maybe shorten the transition phases that we have seen in the past? What are the action items to make those transition times shorter? And what are the funding needs, and when the company is expected to reach break-even, and that any sort of strategic questions that these will help to answer. And before I hand over to Jane, to use the S-curve model effectively, simply click on the link provided in this slide. Additionally, if you need like further guidance on how to manage the model, you can, as I was saying, watch our tutorial video. It's provided in the link there. And if you require further support in adapting the model to sort of your unique requirements and a specific model, so please feel free to contact me. And yeah, thank you for your attention today.
Thank you so much, Jorge. And thank you to the audience. I know we shared a lot of concentrated and the technical material with you, with the spirit of this being that we want it to be a useful tool, something that you can take home and use. I think a lot of the interfaces and the material provided are pretty intuitive, but also to connect this session to follow-up sessions one-on-one, where you can leverage the knowledge and expertise of Jorge and Matt. Let me pause. We've been speaking for a while to take questions from the audience. Feel free to drop them in or raise your hand and we can turn you on. while we're waiting for questions, one I have is to get a sense from you, Jorge and Matt, your observations or experience in the ROI, whether it's revenue or fundraising or some of these like scaling timelines that you've seen as a result of applying this approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can jump in with just like high level, and I think maybe Jorge, you can get into the nuts and bolts a little better than I can with the financial models and whatnot. But yeah, I mentioned on a high level that like this is something we've employed even before it was a formalized toolkit that we're putting out there. It's something that we've employed for some time within our Catalyst Fund engagements. I think that there were several examples of engagements with startups who were in a pretty challenging spot. Like they knew that something was stuck in terms of their growth. Maybe they're not able to iterate on products fast enough, or you know, the adoption is not matching up with the insights that they've seen from the market and doing market research and kind of primary research with potential and real users. And just looking at it holistically, it'd be easy after, you know, some time to just throw up your hands and say, like, I guess we're not going to really get to the core of what's needed to unlock this stuff. But in many cases, just by leveraging this type of approach in our diagnostic stage of our acceleration engagements, instead of saying like, hey, we're stuck in growth, we're not reaching, you know, the number of users that we want, or the level of revenue that we want, or whatever the primary KPI is, we were able to really like assess these blockages across these layers and say, hey, actually, it turns out that your engineering team is actually a pretty solid engineering team. Your product team is actually like amazing at coming up with ideas, but there's a sticking point in translating from idea to technical specification, and you need like a team member to do that. And so what looked like a product sticking point or a product market fit sticking point actually turned out to be something like as straightforward as hiring a scrum master or engineering manager to translate, you know, high level ideas into an engineering firm, into an engineering specification, and then, you know, check in on that and translate feedback into the product design loop. So I think that's like one example of really concrete, non-obvious impact. We started with looking at, you know, financial and growth of product sticking points, and it turned out to be, at least in large part, a result of the types of roles and team members that need to be added at that stage. So of course, there's then implications in how do we finance or justify this hire? And I think that's where some of the financial modeling came in. Like, look, if this unsticks and you can get this out there, we can use this hire as an indirect milestone, and then start to brainstorm around some direct milestones that might end up in the financial model as a result of that. So that's one example. I'm happy to go into more depth. I hope that answers the question from product side of view. I don't know if Jorge, you want to expand on that.
Yeah, happy to. So we have been very recently implementing this financial modeling approach, and as I was saying, it is really the result of synthesizing all the learnings, you know, after working with really a variety of companies, you know, from different backgrounds, serving different markets. But the one thing that I would say is, I mean, and this, it makes sense for us to really launch a toolkit as opposed to just a methodology for improving your financial modeling processes. So I think that it's important to see this whole toolkit very organically, like really the seven key aspects that Matt highlighted. So, or levers that Matt highlighted. So it's almost like when you focus on one, you know, there's always a trade-off. I would say though that the resulting financial model should be like a clear means to communicate a clear study for, you know, funders or stakeholders, and as long as you have like a very cohesive narrative of how are you playing with those other 6 levers, I think the final result will be a very, very strong story to tell.
Let's take a moment while we've been answering questions and waiting for others to come through to get a sense of how the audience has perceived the S-curve modeling approach. A poll for everyone to ask you, based on what you've seen today and learned, do you plan on using the financial modeling approach as a means, as a tool that's more useful and helpful for planning? Let me just give you a few more seconds. So far, I see a resounding yes. So it seems like you've done your job, Matt and Jorge. And if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them into the chat or into the QA function. As we're coming to an end, I just want to make sure I also highlight the resources that were made available, as well as giving you the link to the office hours I had mentioned. So out of the respondents so far, I'll stop the poll because I want to keep moving. Let me just share out of those that had responded, which is about half of the group right now, hearing primarily yes, right? 86% of the audience seeing the utility of this approach. Thank you. So if you have any questions, feel free to pause or raise your hand. We're happy to stop and take them. I did want to highlight this link where we offer as a follow-up to this session, right, where it was more around the theory and opportunity to get a chance to take questions with Jorge and Matt live. The next step here is then to access the model, to read through the material, well, the videos and the toolkit. And from there, schedule one-on-one office hours with Matt and Jorge. So you're able to do that through this link. All the material that we shared today, including the recording, links, and the toolkit, will be sent in a follow-up email as well. You can hit this you can access this Calendly link as well to schedule time with Matt and Jorge. It is important for you to look at the model before, and especially think through the milestones that, as Jorge mentioned, are part of the inputs to the exercise. And the office hours are for next week, right? We're trying to connect the timeliness and keeping this connected and alive on top of your minds. So please just keep that in mind for if you want to reach out. Okay, and as I mentioned, the IDC program is coming to the end of its 2-year exploration and learning about working with growth stage startups. Today, we've launched the toolkit. The material that was presented today is just a short summary of all that the toolkit has to offer, the tools like the scorecard, the theory, the deeper explanation of the financial model, and those media resources are part of the toolkit, so feel free to scan and access the toolkit. Leave that for a second. And I'd also like to mention that this is just one of several outputs that we've been creating as a program to serve innovators like you, right, that are trying to impact low-income populations and work in the last mile, that are in the digital commerce space, that are in fintech at the intersection with commerce. So in addition to the toolkit, we also have the digital onboarding playbook, which was published recently as well. This is more about helping companies be strategic and through a playbook that's 5 standalone chapters, being able to hone in on the areas that can help you be much more efficient with your onboarding approach to last mile customers, last mile small businesses and MSEs. So you're also able to scan that playbook and download that. And we also have the evolution of inclusive digital commerce. This is a report and research that takes a snapshot of, in the case of Ghana, but I think could be representative of markets across the continent, but how we've seen digital commerce evolving and what the implications are for businesses in this space. And finally, coming soon, a short brief on within that digital commerce landscape, what is the gender lens? in which we see that women are benefiting from digital commerce, but are at a disadvantage or a lower starting point, and thinking through how to much more reach them much more and target support. And finally, from a livelihoods perspective, looking at other ecosystems where there are opportunities to create livelihoods and accelerate improving and supporting livelihoods. So we've also looked at the role of digital marketplaces like carbon finance. So these are all knowledge outputs that are available for you to learn from and benefit through the program's direct work and evidence and research. So those are available to you also at this short link. And if you can also visit our website to access all these materials that we've shared with you today. And just to, I think, say thank you to everyone, to our presenters and experts that have shared hopefully what's a practical and useful tool for you in your work of being a startup and founder and team member, or working with startups. We hope it's useful and something that can really help you be a better apply and be more strategic about how you think about your growth trajectories. So thank you to everyone for attending, for Matt and for being a part. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you so much.